Admiral Kim Hana pressed her palm against the cold metal of the bridge railing, feeling the subtle vibration of the Nemesis as its massive engines hummed with barely contained power. The view screen dominated the forward wall, displaying the growing light of Sol, a star that had haunted human dreams for 3 millennia. She had seen this moment in countless simulations, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. "Distance to Sol system?" she asked, her voice cutting through the quiet tension that filled the bridge. 12 light hours and closing, Admiral," replied Navigation Officer Lee Sujin, her fingers dancing across holographic controls that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors. "We'll reach the outer planets in 6 hours at current speed," Hana nodded, her enhanced eyes automatically adjusting to track the dozens of tactical displays surrounding her command station. Each screen showed a different section of the returning fleet, 50,000 ships stretching across space like a metal constellation. Some vessels were massive city ships, home to millions of humans who had never seen a planet's surface. Others were sleek warships, their hulls scarred by centuries of battles fought in the deep void between stars. Captain Park Jin-ho approached from the communications center, his expression unreadable. Like all humans born in the Exile, his features carried the subtle modifications that 3,000 years of genetic adaptation had brought. Slightly larger eyes for better vision in low light, denser bone structure for life in artificial gravity, and the telltale silver threads at his temples that marked his connection to the ship's neural network. "All fleet commanders have confirmed their positions," he reported. "The Harmony leads the Science Division, the Defiance commands our combat wings, and the Memory carries our historical archives. Every ship is ready for whatever we find in the inner system." Hana studied the fleet formation on her tactical display. The arrangement wasn't random. It told the story of humanity's exile. The outer ring consisted of the Wanderer-class ships, built from the wreckage of the original Exile fleet. These vessels bore the scars of their desperate escape from Earth, their hulls patched with materials scavenged from 100 dead worlds. The middle formation contained the Colony-class ships, massive structures that had served as mobile cities for generations of humans who had never known planetary gravity. At the formation's heart flew the newest ships, the Genesis-class vessels, that represented everything humanity had become. These weren't just spacecraft. They were living entities, their hulls grown from biometallic compounds that could repair themselves and adapt to any environment. The technology would have been impossible without the harsh lessons learned during the Exile. "Sir," called out Sensor Specialist Choi Min-soo from his station, "I'm detecting something unusual in the asteroid belt. The mineral composition doesn't match our historical records." Hana moved to the sensor station, her augmented nervous system instantly interfacing with the ship's detection array. Through the neural link, she could feel the electromagnetic signatures of every object within 1 billion kilometers. The asteroid belt had been transformed. What had once been random chunks of rock and metal now showed signs of deliberate modification. "They've been mining," she realized. "The hegemony has been harvesting the asteroids for 3,000 years. The implications were staggering. Earth's asteroid belt had contained enough raw materials to build 1,000 fleets. If the hegemony had been systematically extracting those resources, they had grown far more powerful than humanity's intelligence reports had suggested." "Admiral," Park Jin-ho said quietly, "the crew is requesting permission to access the memorial archives." Hana understood immediately. The memorial archives contained the genetic memories of every human who had died during the Exile, their experiences, their knowledge, and their final thoughts preserved in quantum storage. For many crew members, accessing these memories was the only way to truly understand what had been lost when humanity was driven from Earth. "Granted," she said, "but limited access only. We need our people focused on the mission, not lost in the past." As the crew began their careful communion with ancestral memories, Hana felt the ship's atmosphere change. The Nemesis had been designed not just as a warship, but as a living memorial to the Exile. Its corridors contained gardens where plants grew under artificial sunlight, their seeds carried across the galaxy by desperate refugees. The ship's central core housed a perfect holographic recreation of Earth as it had been before the Exile. blue oceans, green continents, and white clouds slowly turning in eternal memory. Incoming transmission from the Harmony, announced Communications Officer Kim Jae-won. Dr. Yoon So-young reports that her xenobiology team has detected familiar DNA patterns in the solar wind. Hana's enhanced hearing caught the subtle intake of breath from her bridge crew. The solar wind carrying Earth's DNA meant that life on their homeworld was not just surviving, it was thriving. After 3 millennia of wondering whether the hegemony had turned Earth into a lifeless rock, they now knew their planet lived. Open. A channel to all fleet commanders, Hana ordered. It's time they understood what we've really come back to find. The holographic displays around the bridge shimmered to life, showing the faces of 50 ship captains, men and women who carried the hopes of billions of exiled humans. Each face told a story of survival, of adaptation, of the long journey that had brought them back to this moment. Fleet commanders, Hana began, her voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of exile. We're not just returning to Earth. We're returning to a world that has been transformed by our enemies into something we may not recognize. But remember, we are no longer the humans who were driven away. We are something new, something stronger, something that the hegemony never imagined we could become. The view screen flickered, and suddenly they could see it. A pale blue dot growing larger with each passing moment. Earth, home. The world that had cast them out, now waiting to discover what its children had become in the darkness between stars. Captain. Lee Min-ho felt his heart skip a beat as the Shadow Walker completed its final approach to Earth's orbital zone. The stealth ship moved like a ghost through space, its hull designed to bend light and absorb sensor waves. 3,000 years of technological evolution had made this possible, a vessel that could slip past any detection system the hegemony had ever imagined. Full stealth mode engaged, reported navigation specialist Park Hyori, her voice barely above a whisper. Even though no alien could hear them, the crew instinctively spoke softly this close to enemy territory. We're now completely invisible to their orbital stations. Minho activated his enhanced optical implants, feeling the familiar tingle as quantum processors merged with his natural vision. The modification allowed him to see across multiple spectrums simultaneously. Infrared, ultraviolet, and electromagnetic. Signatures all layered into a single comprehensive view. What he saw made him pause in wonder and rage. Earth hung before them like a perfect jewel, more beautiful than the ancient holographic records had suggested. The continents were green with restored forests. The oceans sparkled with pristine clarity, and white clouds drifted peacefully across azure skies. But this paradise came with a terrible price. The complete erasure of human civilization. I can see the continental divisions clearly now, whispered Lieutenant Choi Sora, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the sensor array. The Valens have built their crystal spires across what used to be Asia and northern Europe. Those structures, they're massive. Some of them reach into the upper atmosphere. Through the ship's neural link, Minho shared her vision. The Valen. Cities were architectural marvels, towers of living crystal that grew like massive trees, their faceted surfaces catching and redirecting sunlight in patterns that painted rainbows across the landscape. Flying vehicles moved between the spires like glowing insects, following paths of pure energy that the crystals generated. The southern hemisphere shows heavy biomodification, added sensor operator Kim Woo-jin. The Thornids have essentially turned the entire continent into a single living organism. I'm reading root systems that stretch for thousands of kilometers underground. Minho's enhanced vision shifted to examine the Thornid territories. Where once stood the cities of humans, now grew massive organic structures that pulsed with alien life. Buildings weren't constructed. They were grown from seed-like pods that expanded into complex shapes. The landscape itself had been modified, with rivers redirected to flow through living channels and mountains, carved into terraced gardens that fed the biocities. Chief Engineer Yoon Dae-ho pulled up tactical displays showing the planet's defensive systems. His cybernetic arm interfaced directly with the ship's computers, allowing him to process information at superhuman speed. Their orbital defense platforms are jokes, he announced with disgust. Pretty decorations meant to impress visitors, not fight wars. Look at this. Their energy weapons couldn't penetrate our basic hull plating. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The hegemony had driven humanity into exile, claiming they were too violent, too dangerous for civilized space. Yet after 3 millennia of peace, they had forgotten how to fight. Their weapons were ceremonial. Their shields were for show, and their sensors couldn't detect a human stealth ship floating right under their noses. "Sir," called communications specialist Lee Nara, "I'm intercepting their civilian broadcasts. They're celebrating something called Liberation Day, the anniversary of humanity's exile." The bridge fell silent. Through the neural network, Minho felt the surge of anger from his crew. Liberation Day. The aliens were celebrating the day they had committed genocide against humanity, turning their darkest crime into a holiday. "Show me their cities up close," Minho ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. The main display shifted to show detailed views of the alien settlements. In the Valen crystal cities, graceful beings of living light moved through structures that seemed to sing with harmonic frequencies. Their bodies were translucent, shifting between solid and energy states as they traveled along paths of crystallized starlight. The thorned biocities showed a different kind of alien beauty. Creatures that looked like walking trees tended gardens that stretched to the horizon, their branch-like limbs carefully nurturing plants that bore fruits of impossible colors. Their cities breathed like living lungs, expanding and contracting. In rhythm with some planetary heartbeat, the Kelrathi occupy the equatorial ocean zones, reported Choi Sora. Their cities float on the water's surface, connected by bridges that seem to be made of compressed water itself. I'm detecting artificial gills on their structures. They can submerge completely when needed. And the Zephyrians control the high-altitude regions, added Kim Woo-jin. Their cloud cities move constantly through the atmosphere, riding wind currents that they somehow control. I'm reading atmospheric processes that can create or dissipate storm systems at will. Minho studied each alien civilization with the eye of someone who had spent decades preparing for this moment. The hegemony had turned Earth into a showcase of their 4 species' greatest achievements. Each continent displayed a different approach to planetary stewardship, and all of them were undeniably beautiful. But beauty built on genocide was still genocide. "Sir," Yoon Dae-ho said quietly, "I need to show you something else." His cybernetic interface projected a holographic display that made the entire bridge crew gasp. These readings, the aliens haven't just been living on Earth, they've been mining it. Deep core excavations, molecular extraction, systematic harvesting of rare elements. The data was devastating. For 3,000 years, the hegemony had been slowly consuming Earth's resources while maintaining the beautiful surface as camouflage. They had hollowed out mountains, drained mineral deposits, and extracted materials that would take millions of years to replenish. "They've been feeding off our world like parasites," whispered Lee Nara. Minho felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Through his genetic memories, he could recall the desperate final broadcasts from Earth as human refugees fled the sea. Planet. Families torn apart, children crying for homes they would never see again, elderly humans dying in failing ships that barely had enough power to reach the next star system. The aliens had promised the exiled humans that Earth would be preserved, that it would remain a monument to human achievement. Instead, they had turned it into their personal playground while slowly devouring its substance. "Phase 1 begins now," Minho announced to his crew. "It's time the hegemony learned that their perfect paradise has been invaded by ghosts they thought they had killed 3,000 years ago." He activated the ship's quantum transmitter, sending a coded signal that would be undetectable to alien sensors, but would trigger response systems throughout the galaxy. Within hours, sleeper agents, who had been waiting centuries for this moment, would begin their work. The Shadow Walker adjusted its position, moving closer to Earth's surface while remaining completely invisible to the elaborate but useless sensor networks the aliens had built. Soon the hegemony would discover that their age of peace was about to end. The humans had returned, and they were no longer the desperate refugees who had been driven into the darkness. They were something new, something the aliens had never imagined possible, survivors who had become predators, and they were hungry for justice. High Counselor Vectar's translucent fingers froze over the holographic agricultural display as the first impossible thing happened. The human memorial, a simple black stone pillar that had stood silent for 3,000 years, suddenly blazed with brilliant white light. The crystal being's form flickered between solid and energy as shock rippled through his consciousness. "Security. Alert in Memorial Square," crackled the voice of Captain Zilna through the crystalline communication network. "The human monument is... It's glowing, Counselor. The intensity is increasing every second." Vectar rose from his reviewing chamber, his crystal body chiming softly as he moved. Through the transparent walls of his tower, he could see the memorial's light cutting through the perpetual rainbow haze that surrounded New Serenity. Citizens were gathering in the square below, their energy forms pulsing with confusion and growing alarm. "Run a full diagnostic on the memorial's power systems," he ordered, but even as he spoke, Vectar knew this was beyond any technology the Valens possessed. The monument had been built from ordinary earthstone, a deliberate choice to show how completely humanity had been reduced to mere memory. The light from the memorial suddenly pulsed, and ancient human letters began appearing on the crystal walls. Throughout the city, the writing blazed with the same white radiance, spelling out words in languages that had been dead for millennia. Vectar's enhanced optical sensors automatically translated the text, and what he read made his energy core. "Fluctuate with fear. We remember, we return, we reclaim." "Counselor," called Science Coordinator Morvac from across the chamber, his crystal form vibrating with distress. "The inscriptions are appearing simultaneously across all sectors, even in the sealed human districts that we abandoned after the Exile, the sealed human districts." Vectar had not thought about those areas in centuries. After driving humanity into exile, the hegemony had preserved the empty human cities as historical curiosities, then eventually sealed them when maintaining the structures became inconvenient. Now, those forgotten places were awakening. Through the city's sensor network, Vectar watched security drones approach the old human residential towers. The machine's cameras showed corridors that should have been dark and silent for 3,000 years, but echoes of human voices drifted from empty rooms. Children's laughter bounced off walls where no children had played since the exile. Adult. Voices spoke in urgent tones about things that made no sense. Departure schedules, supply shortages, messages to loved ones who had died millennia ago. "It's impossible," Vectar whispered, his crystalline features refracting the memorial's growing radiance. "The humans are extinct. We made sure of that." But even as he spoke, reports flooded in from across the Valen territories. In the crystal, mines beneath Mount Harmony, workers reported seeing human figures moving through tunnels that had been sealed since the exile. The figures appeared solid, but cast no shadows, and when approached, they vanished like morning mist. On the far side of the planet, bioarchitect Zilf was experiencing her own impossibilities. The Thornid leader's root system nervous network was burning with alarm signals from across the southern continent. Her biocities, living organisms that had grown from carefully designed seed pods, were reacting to something that shouldn't exist. "Supervisor, Kethmol reports genetic anomalies in Growth Sector 7, announced her aide, a young Thornid whose bark-like skin showed stress patterns of deep brown and red. "Human DNA signatures are appearing in the local ecosystem, but not as contamination. The patterns show perfect integration with existing life forms." Zilf's branch-like arms trembled as she accessed the biosensor data directly through her neural root system. What she saw defied everything the Thornids understood about biological science. Plants that had been extinct since humanity's exile were blooming in hidden groves throughout her territory. More disturbing, these weren't simple resurrections. The plants showed evolutionary adaptations that would have taken millions of years to develop naturally. "How is this possible?" she demanded, her voice rustling like wind through autumn leaves. "We sterilized every trace of human biological material. We burned their seeds, destroyed their genetic banks, eliminated every sample of their DNA from our world." The answer came in a form that made her entire nervous system spike with terror. Deep in the BioCity's core, where the master organism's consciousness dwelled, human voices began speaking in the long-dead languages of Earth. They whispered of gardens that had been destroyed, of children who had cried for pets and plants they would never see again, of scientists who had begged to preserve Earth's biological heritage as they were driven into exile. Thousands of kilometers away, in the bow, floating cities of the Kelrathi territories, Admiral Rukhan was staring at sensor readings that made no logical sense. His aquatic species had developed the most sophisticated detection systems in the galaxy, capable of tracking objects through multiple dimensions simultaneously. But now those same systems were showing him ghosts. Contact bearing 37 Mark IV, reported his sensor operator, Lieutenant Velshar. Massive energy signature consistent with human vessel design, but the configuration doesn't match any known human technology. Rukhan's gill slits fluttered rapidly, a sign of stress in his species. Through the transparent walls of his command center, he could see his city's defensive platforms swiveling to track the contact. Lock weapons and demand identification. Sir, the contact just vanished, Velshar announced, her voice tight with confusion. No warp signature, no dimensional fold, no energy discharge. It just stopped existing. Secondary contact appearing at coordinates 11 Mark 9, called another operator. Same energy signature, different location, distance by the depths it's already gone again. The phantom ships continued their impossible dance around the Kelrathi territories for hours. They would appear long enough to be detected, long enough for weapons to begin locking on, then vanish completely. Each appearance lasted precisely long enough to prove they were real, but not long enough for effective response. High above in the cloud-top cities of the Zephyrians, Windspeaker Airmoth felt the atmospheric changes before her instruments detected them. Her species could read the songs that wind and weather sang, interpreting meaning from patterns of pressure and temperature that other races couldn't perceive. But now the atmosphere itself was carrying impossible messages. Whispers in the ancient human tongue rode the jet streams, speaking of return and reckoning. The words were so faint that only a Zephyrian could detect them, but they carried emotional resonances that made Airmoth's feathered wings tremble with unconscious fear. The very air remembers them, she murmured to her aide, a younger Zephyrian whose crest feathers were already rising in alarm. 3,000 years we have controlled the winds, and now they carry the voices of the extinct. Emergency. Sessions convened across all 4 hegemony councils within hours. The crystalline halls of New Serenity, the bioamphitheaters of the Thornid cities, the pressure chambers of Kelrathi command centers, and the aerial meeting spheres of the Zephyrians all buzzed with urgent discussions. For the first time in 3 millennia, the word human was spoken with fear rather than dismissive contempt. The impossible was happening across their perfect world, and the only explanation was the one they had refused to consider. They're alive, Vectar announced to the Joint Council, his crystal form flickering with barely controlled terror. Not only alive, but they've returned to our world, and they're not seeking quick vengeance. They're toying with us, letting us know they're here before they reveal their true intentions. The age of peace was ending, and the ghosts of humanity's exile had come home to collect what was owed to them. The fabric of space itself seemed to tear open as 50,000 human ships materialized around Earth in perfect formation. But what made the hegemony leaders freeze in terror wasn't the size of the fleet, it was what accompanied it. Alongside the sleek human vessels flew ships of dozens of species that the hegemony had dismissed, ignored, or oppressed for millennia. Admiral Kim Hana stood on the bridge of the Nemesis, her enhanced form radiating the accumulated authority of 3,000 years of survival. Behind her, the command center displayed a sight that would have been impossible before humanity's exile, representatives of a galactic coalition that spanned hundreds of worlds. Open communication channels to all 4 hegemony capitals, she ordered. Let them see what we've become. The massive screens throughout the bridge flickered to life, showing the stunned faces of hegemony leaders across Earth. In the crystal towers of New Serenity, Vectar's translucent form wavered between solid and energy states. In the bio-cities of the southern continent, Zilf's branch-like arms trembled with disbelief. The Kelrathi Admiral Rukhan's gills fluttered rapidly in his underwater command center, while high above, Zephyrian Windspeaker Airmoth's feathered wings spread wide in unconscious threat display. "I am Admiral Kim Hana of the human Exodus Fleet," she began, her voice carrying across space to reach every corner of the solar system. "We are the children you cast into darkness, the species you condemned to extinction. We have returned not as the desperate exiles you remember, but as something far greater." Behind her, the bridge's holographic displays showed the true scope of humanity's achievement. Towering reptilian figures of the saurid species stood alongside human officers, their scaled hides bearing the scars of hegemony strip mining operations that had devastated their homeworld. Floating beside them were the gaseous forms of the ethereals, beings of pure energy whose attempts at communication the hegemony had never bothered to decode. "For you see the resonance," Hana continued, gesturing to crystalline beings whose bodies sang with harmonic frequencies. "Your Veylan cousins, yet you silenced their songs because they didn't match your perfect crystal harmonies. You see the void, swimmers, creatures who live in the emptiness between stars, whom you declared non-existent because they didn't fit your definition of life." The camera panned across the bridge, showing dozens of species that the hegemony had written off as primitive, unworthy, or simply irrelevant. Each race had found refuge with humanity during the long exile, and each had contributed to the coalition that now surrounded Earth. Captain Park Jin-ho stepped forward, his cybernetic implants gleaming as they interfaced with the ship's communication systems. "For 3,000 years you've ruled this galaxy, believing you were the pinnacle of evolution. You divided species into the worthy and the unworthy, the civilized and the primitive. But you made one crucial mistake." Through the view screen, they could see the hegemony leaders leaning forward, their various forms of anxiety clear, despite their alien features. "You assumed that survival meant accepting your judgment," Park continued. "You never imagined that. The species you cast aside would find each other, would learn from each other, would grow strong together in the darkness you sent us into." Hana moved to the center of the bridge, her presence commanding even through the vast distances of space. "You turned our exile into our evolution. While you grew comfortable in your garden paradise, we learned to thrive in the void. We became shepherds to the forgotten, teachers to the dismissed, protectors of those you deemed unworthy." The tactical displays around the bridge showed the true scope of the returning fleet. The human ships were impressive enough, vessels that could fold space, manipulate matter at the molecular level, and exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But the Allied ships represented technologies that the hegemony had never encountered. Saurid vessels with hulls that could regenerate from any damage, their living metal flowing like liquid to seal breaches and adapt to any weapon. Ethereal ships that existed as pure energy, capable of moving through solid matter or transforming into devastating energy weapons. Resonant craft that could shatter enemy vessels with perfectly tuned sonic frequencies. "You have a choice," Park announced, his voice carrying the weight of 3 millennia of injustice. "Accept integration into a galaxy where no species stands above another, or face the same exile you once imposed upon us." The response came swiftly from several hegemony worlds. Weapons platforms around the Veylan territories opened fire, their crystal-focused energy beams lancing out toward the human fleet. Thornid bioships launched clouds of corrosive spores designed to eat through metal hulls. Kelrathi water cannons fired streams of weaponized liquid that could punch through armor plating. But the attacks never reached their targets. As the weapons approached the human ships, they simply stopped working. Energy beams dissipated into harmless light. Spores withered and died in the vacuum of space. Water streams froze and shattered before they could make contact. "Impossible," whispered Vectar, his crystal form flickering with disbelief. "Our weapons should have destroyed them." The truth was more unsettling than destruction would have been. The human ships hadn't fired back or even raised shields. They had simply caused all hegemony technology to cease functioning through methods the aliens couldn't comprehend. Across the attacking world's communication systems went dark, power grids shut down, and defensive installations became inert metal sculptures. "We're not here for conquest," Hana announced as the hegemony worlds fell silent. "We're here for transformation. Your age of comfortable supremacy is ending. The question is whether you'll evolve with us or become extinct through your own stubbornness." But not all hegemony leaders chose defiance. On the Thornid colony world of Green Haven, bioarchitect Molith made a decision that would echo through history. Her BioCity's communication systems projected her image across the planet as she spoke words that no hegemony leader had ever spoken. "I surrender," she announced, her branch-like arms spread wide in a gesture of submission. "The human Exodus fleet speaks truth. We drove you into exile, believing we were protecting the galaxy from your violence. Instead, we were protecting ourselves from competition." Her words rippled through the bio-neural networks that connected all Thornid cities. "I formally apologize for the ancient exile. We were wrong to judge you unworthy of existence. We were wrong to steal your world. We were wrong to call ourselves your superiors." Molith's surrender sparked a chain reaction across the galaxy. Other Thornid colonies began transmitting similar messages. Some Kelwrathi admirals ordered their fleets to stand down. Even a few Valen crystal cities dimmed their weapons and opened communication channels. The battle for Earth had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a war fought not for conquest, but for transformation. The returning humans offered their enemies a choice between evolution and extinction, between growing beyond their comfortable prejudices or facing the same fate they had once imposed on others. And across the solar system, the hegemony species began to realize that their perfect paradise had been built on foundations of injustice that were finally crumbling beneath the weight of their own contradictions. The morning sun cast rainbow patterns through the crystal metal fusion towers of New Soul as director Kim Hana walked through the Harmony Gardens. 1 year had passed since humanity's return, and Earth had transformed into something that defied every prediction made by both species. Children's laughter filled the air, human voices mixing with the harmonic chimes of young violins and the rustling whispers of Thornid seedlings. "Director Hana," called 8-year-old Kim Tae-hyung, his voice bright with excitement as he ran toward her. Behind him floated his best friend Shimara, a young Valen whose crystalline body sparkled with joy patterns that painted the garden path with dancing lights. Beside them walked Morphia, a Thornid child whose bark-like skin showed the green and gold patterns that indicated happiness in her species. "We built a new playground," Taehyung announced, pointing toward a structure that perfectly embodied the new world they were creating. The playground grew from living Thornid biomaterial, its surfaces soft and self-healing, while Valen crystal formations provided slides that hummed with musical tones. Human quantum technology made some sections float weightlessly, allowing children to experience the joy of flight in complete safety. Hana knelt to the children's level, her enhanced senses automatically adjusting to communicate across species barriers. "Tell me about it," she said, speaking in the new hybrid language that was emerging naturally among the young, a blend of human Korean, Valen harmonic frequencies, and Thornid biochemical signals. "The slide sings different songs depending on how fast you go," Shimara explained, her crystalline voice creating actual musical notes that danced in the air. "And the climbing walls change shape to match what you're thinking about. My favorite part is the healing grove," added Morphia, her words accompanied by the sweet scent of growing flowers that Thornids use to express strong emotions. "When someone gets hurt, the trees make medicine that tastes like their favorite food." Watching the children play together, Hana marveled at how naturally they had adapted to their multi-species world. These young ones would grow up knowing cooperation as their baseline reality, never understanding the artificial barriers their parents had spent millennia building and tearing down. A gentle chime from her neural implant announced an incoming message from Ambassador Lee Minho, who was currently touring the integration zones across the planet. His holographic form materialized beside her, showing him standing in what had once been the heavily defended border between Violan and Thornid territories. "The transformation continues to exceed our projections," he reported, his image flickering slightly as quantum transmitters adjusted for the distance. "The former border zones have become the most innovative areas on the planet. When you force different technologies to work together, apparently, you get breakthroughs nobody expected. Behind Minho, Hana could see the evidence of that cooperation. Massive trees grew with crystal formations embedded in their trunks, creating living buildings that could process information, generate power, and maintain themselves indefinitely. Flying vehicles moved through the air on streams of manipulated gravity, their biometal hulls shifting shape to optimize for current conditions. Dr. Cho Minji wants to show you the latest medical breakthrough, Minho continued. The combination of human quantum healing, Valen energy manipulation, and Thornid biological regeneration has created treatment methods that can cure diseases we thought were impossible to fix. The medical centers had become showcases of interspecies cooperation. Human doctors worked alongside Valen energy healers and Thornid bioshapers to treat patients from dozens of species. Injuries that would have been fatal under the old separate systems now became minor inconveniences, healed by technologies that drew from the best of all civilizations. In the Federation Council chambers, Chief Technology Integrator Yoon Daiho was having the most productive day of his career. Around the circular table sat beings who had been bitter enemies just 1 year ago, now working together to solve problems that none of them could have tackled alone. The new starship designs are ready for testing, announced Admiral Rukhan, the former Kelrathi hunter, who now coordinated the Federation's exploration fleets. His aquatic features had been modified with human biotechnology, allowing him to work comfortably in air-breathing environments while retaining his species' superior spatial reasoning abilities. The holographic displays showed vessels that were marvels of hybrid engineering, ships that could exist as solid matter, pure energy, or biological organisms depending on mission requirements, hulls that could regenerate from battle damage, engines that drew power from the quantum foam of space itself, and sensors that could detect life across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Saurid mining guilds have agreed to share their planetary restoration techniques, added bioarchitect Molith, the Thornid leader who had been the first to surrender. We can heal worlds that were damaged by the old extraction methods. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The hegemony had driven humanity into exile, claiming they were too dangerous for civilized space. But it was precisely that willingness to push boundaries, to refuse to accept limitations, that had enabled humans to forge alliances with species the hegemony had dismissed. Now those same dangerous qualities were being used to heal worlds and build technologies that benefited everyone. Some hegemony worlds had chosen differently. Rather than accept integration, they had fled to distant galaxies, taking their technologies and their prejudices with them. The Federation had let them go, understanding that forced cooperation was no cooperation at all. But most had stayed, discovering that humanity's version of revenge was something far more challenging than destruction. It was transformation. As evening approached, Hana stood on her apartment balcony in the upper levels of New Seoul's central spire. The city stretched out below her, a living testament to what could be achieved when different species chose cooperation over competition. Gardens climbed the sides of buildings, their bioluminescent flowers providing gentle light as darkness fell. Crystal formations sang evening harmonies that helped the city's inhabitants transition peacefully from day to night. Captain Park Jin-ho joined her, his cybernetic implants gleaming softly in the twilight. "The exploration fleets sent their reports," he said. 12 new worlds have requested Federation membership this month. The idea is spreading faster than we anticipated. Above them, the stars were no longer points of distant light but destinations where former enemies worked together to build something greater than any of them could achieve alone. Each light represented worlds where human, Valen, Thornid, Kelrathi, and dozens of other species were learning that their differences made them stronger, not weaker. "We came seeking vengeance," Hana murmured, watching a Federation starship gracefully lift off from the spaceport, its mixed crew heading out to establish another cooperative colony. "But we found something better." "What's that?" Park asked, though he already knew the answer. "Purpose," she replied. "We discovered that the greatest revenge against those who cast you out is to become so much more than what they feared, that they begged to join you. The human species had returned to Earth not as conquerors seeking to reclaim their lost paradise, but as gardeners ready to plant seeds of cooperation that would bloom across the galaxy. And in the laughter of children who saw no barriers between species, in the songs of crystal cities that celebrated diversity, and in the living ships that carried hope to distant stars, humanity had found their true victory. They had transformed exile into evolution, and in doing so, had given the galaxy something it had never possessed, a future where no child would ever know the pain of being cast out for being different. The end.